Hello, and welcome to Why Make, where we talk with makers from different disciplines about what inspires them to make. I am your host, Erik Wolken. If you'd like to learn more about Why Make, please go to our website, why-make.com. Also, please consider supporting Why Make and our current fundraising campaign to support our trip to the Emma International Collaboration in Big River, Saskatchewan. Again, just go to why-make.com and click the donate button. All donations are tax deductible through our fiscal sponsor, Fractured Atlas.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Navigating the night together.
The music you are listening to is We Used to Be Birds by episode 60 guest Jonathan Byrd, actually the first musician to grace the Why Make podcast, but Jonathan is so much more than a musician. He is a songwriter / storyteller extraordinaire, a poet, a photographer, a painter, a teacher, and now student in physics, and I'm positive I left something out. I have known Jonathan for a long time, and I've watched his career blossom almost from the beginning, but we haven't sat down and had a serious conversation really about anything in many, many years. And then I heard through the grapevine that he was in school studying physics and no longer on the road being a touring musician, and my mind was kind of blown. It seemed like, wow, that was a pretty drastic change for someone in their early 50s. But on the other hand, having known Jonathan for this period of time, I was pretty sure there was a sound reason for the move in a different direction. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, wow, we really needed to have a conversation, because in my mind, the sciences and the arts are so closely linked. So here we go with part 1 of a wide open discussion on a host of topics from songwriting to physics with Jonathan Byrd. We're going to start in sort of the organic Why Make way, which is the Why Make question, which is, what's your first memory of making something? When's your first memory of actually going, I made this?
I don't know if I have a first memory. Yeah, my mom started teaching me piano when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and immediately I started playing my own things. What happens if I combine these notes? What happens if I use the black keys here? What happens if I do this? What happens if I try to imitate this melody that I heard on the radio? And I've realized, it's taken me most of my life to realize this, but I realized that I am like a tactile learner, so that shows up in ways like, if I'm on stage and the monitors are terrible and I can't hear myself, I still know what it feels like to play the thing that I need to play, and I can play it pretty well, like 90%. Whereas people that I've worked with, they're very particular about their monitors. They have to hear their monitors. If the monitors aren't great, they can't move around on stage very much, because they really have to hear what they're doing to process it. And I realize I just play something until I know the way it feels, and that's the way that I learn it. So that was really early in my musical education, was me educating myself about how do I hear something and then play it, or how do I play it and remember it. And the way that I play it and remember it is just to play it over and over, and my muscles remember it.
Right. Although interesting, you're talking about feeling something, that's a very visual way of learning also, as I think about it, because there's all these rules for creating visual objects, the rule of 3, all these other things, what creates a pleasing form. But it's almost all entirely intuition. I mean, I'll look at a form and I'll go, it pleases me. Now, what pleases you, I have no idea.
Right.
And actually, I don't care. But
right. Well, I like to think about the rule of three as the guideline of three.
Yeah.
If you're struggling with a composition, it's great to pull those things out and say, well, okay, how does it fit with this? Or use your spiral. Where does the spiral end? Oh, it ends a little bit off of this. Maybe that's it. Maybe if I pull this in a little bit, maybe that feels better. This just gives me a guideline to try to find the thing that I want to find. But if I'm happy with it, like you said, if I'm happy with it, I don't care what the guideline says or what the rule says or what somebody else thinks about it. I am pleased with it. I have achieved what I set out to achieve as an artist.
And that is very fitting with how you think, because it's an intuitive feel for. That rhyme, that pacing that may not fit into any standard rule book. It may not be the way most people are going to recognize it with their ears, but with your ears, it feels resolved. Mm-hmm. That's obviously can be learned, mm-hmm. but there is an intuitive sense that I think we nurture from a young age if you allow yourself. Mm-hmm. And you begin to get more and more of a feel for what looks right or what sounds right mm-hmm. or what feels right. Mm-hmm. One of the big reasons for doing this podcast is to really promote that, is to promote creativity. Mm-hmm. I mean, we are talking with creative people, but everybody's creative and everybody has a different path to accessing that creativity.
Yes.
And it's just sort of, I think having other people lay out their creativity is a helpful tool.
Yeah. Yeah, when people say, I'm just not very creative, you're so creative. Humans are inherently creative just by being the species that you are. And I want to go back to something you just said. If you allow yourself, right? So children have no concept of talent. Talent, I believe, is this concept that we develop later in life so that we can sort of beat back the fear of not being good enough within the safety of being competent at something. So when somebody says you're talented, what I wish they would say is, I can see how dedicated you are and how much work you've done. There is, a little bit of talent. Like I could never be, I could never be a professional basketball player. Like they are certainly born with a certain amount of physical talent to do that. However, I think if I got fascinated with basketball when I was 7 years old and I just did nothing for 6 hours a day but play basketball, I could probably be on a professional team. Like there's not really that much difference between somebody who has some innate physical talent and somebody who just works on it. And even the people who have the innate physical talent have to work on it all the time for decades to be as good as they are. So this concept of talent, I'm very careful with that word. And I have to sort of translate when people say, you're so talented. Like I came out of the womb with a guitar in my hand.
And right, and as if that it's some sort of special, unique experience. I finished a film about 2 years ago on the great Tommy Simpson. Right there, living in a world I created. Mm-hmm. If you want to spend 20 minutes watching it, I think it's worth it. I believe my average length of time for watch on YouTube is 4. But even in 4 minutes, I think you can get out of it that two things that Tommy says is that one, we are all creative, whether you're planting flowers or making pies. Mm-hmm. That's a common Tommy Simpson tagline. And the other thing is that you can tell a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old just to go and play with paints and have fun and be creative, and they'll do it all day. Right. You tell a 15 or 20-year-old to do that, and obviously the result is not the same.
Right.
Because somehow, do I want to blame it on society? I don't know. Or do I want to blame it on anybody? But the response is different. There's much more apprehension.
Right. And it can be like exercise. Right? Like if you want to preserve your ability to think divergently, if you want to have a healthy brain, and in some ways a healthy life, you need to practice creativity. You need to be creative. You need to do something that you're not good at, something that you don't need to be good at. Is really, I think it's important to me. Like right now I'm painting. I'm a terrible painter. But it helps me to get out of that mode where I need to be good or where I need to judge my work. I just need to be present and create something. I might paint over it.
The interesting is that, I'm not a very good musician because I don't think intuitively. Musically, I'm a visual thinker. But one of the biggest leaps I had to make playing with other people was being willing to stink. Mm-hmm. And it really opened a door when I realized that next solo I take, no matter how awful it is, nobody will die. No lives will be lost.
No.
And so I'll say, how good do we need to be?
This is the crux of what I'm saying about talent, is that being bad at something is mortifying to a grown-up. And so we use that word talent to sort of say, okay, these people are different. They're just built differently. I don't have the abilities that they do, but that's not true. And when you use that word, when you think about other people that way, you're just making excuses for not getting started on whatever thing you're thinking about getting started on whatever thing you're fascinated with. I mean, if you think that they're talented and you appreciate what they do, obviously you're excited about what they're doing. You're excited about that medium. So just do it. I was at the Fisher Fest in Fisher, Texas. Beautiful, this gorgeous barn that held maybe 500 people. I met Tony Rice there. I met Peter Rowan there. And Hot Rise was doing a reunion tour. This is maybe, 8 years ago. And Brian Sutton was the guitarist. And Brian Sutton, for people who don't know, is just one of the best acoustic guitar players in the world, for sure. So they kicked off this tune, and they're playing. Everybody's, tapping their toes. It's great. A couple measures in, Brian laughs and shakes his head, and he takes his capo and moves it one fret, and then he keeps playing.
Obviously, he was in the wrong key.
He was a half step off. He was literally playing the worst thing he possibly could have played with them, but nobody noticed because he was just playing it confidently. He wasn't thinking about whether this was right or wrong or whatever. He was just playing the thing that he thought was the right thing to play. And obviously he had good timing and tone or whatever, and nobody noticed. I noticed that he changed the capo, but I did not hear that he was wrong to begin with. I think that's how wrong you can be, and it's okay.
It's a common joke. If you play all the wrong notes, you call it jazz. It's just a change of perspective.
Right.
You could have been playing something amazing, a half step off, and it was jazz.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Do it again. Do it twice. Everybody thinks you meant it.
Yeah, right. The other rule, if it sounds good, do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it really still sounds good, do it again. You started to go into a little bit about your history and learning, so give us the short Jonathan Byrd biography.
Yes. Well, I remember elementary school being kind of ahead of everybody.
Well, first of all, you were born and raised in Chapel Hill, correct?
Well, I was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Oh, in Fayetteville.
But we left before I remember being there. I was very young. In fact, my first memory is being in a U-Haul with my mom and my dad, and we were moving to Texas. And my dad was excited to cross this particular bridge over the Mississippi River that had recently been built. There was something about the engineering of it that he was excited about, and he was talking about that. That's my first memory, and it's just kind of a blip. And then I have some memories from being in Fort Worth, Texas, where my dad was attending Southwestern Theological Seminary. And then we moved to Germany. I was maybe 4.5, 5 years old. We moved to Germany. We lived in Fernheim and we lived in Gießen. And my dad was a preacher in English-speaking Baptist churches that were mostly for the military. We had tons of military in Germany at the time. And then when I was about 9 or 10, we came back to the States, and my mom and my dad separated, and my mom chose Chapel Hill as a place to go and rebuild her life. So I've been here since then. So when I say I'm from Chapel Hill, that's the real backstory of being from Chapel Hill. And I remember early in elementary school being kind of ahead of people. I remember specifically going to school in first grade and being in a spelling class, and the teacher sort of giving me a book to read and telling me just to chill, kind of while she taught the other students. Like, she realized I could spell anything, and I had been sort of diving into my father's library and reading things I probably shouldn't have been reading when I was 5 or 6 years old. But I was just reading everything voraciously. So I remember in ways like being ahead and school being easy for me and having fun, but somewhere, maybe it was my parents' divorce or moving so much, I don't know, but I remember starting to have problems with school and being kind of bored with it and not being able to focus on things, and certainly once things got divided up and there were like 5 or 6 subjects throughout the day, just being completely unable to keep track of everything that was due and the project that's coming up and all that stuff. And I didn't really have any help at home. And my mom was trying to rebuild her life. My dad was kind of absent. So I just learned whatever I wanted to learn, which is basically how to play the guitar. I was lucky to be at Orange High School here in Hillsborough, North Carolina, that had a big band jazz program, which is really rare for a high school. But there was a big band jazz program. I was in it for 4 years. And in the rhythm section, you get a chart. So it's just a chord chart that tells you what the chords are. They don't tell you what to play. Very rarely you might have a melodic line written on a chart or something like that. But you have to learn how music is put together so that you can pick the 2 or 3 right notes to play right now for this chord change. And that was a great education. That really gave me what I needed. All the tools that I still use as a musician to think about music, the way it's put together, the math of music, basically. So I got out of high school the best I could. I just barely graduated. And I remember Dr. Halkiotis shaking my hand at graduation and looking at me and saying, "Good luck." Handing me my diploma. Like, oh my God. I didn't even expect to get that. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Halkiotis. And so I went out to the Navy, which was a great learning experience, but wasn't for me. Eventually learned how to run my own business as a musician, and I just focused on that. But I always loved the sciences. I love everything. I'm curious. I think the world is beautiful and awesome. I love travel because travel is such a great education. You have to get a little bit of this language, and you have to figure out, well, they wipe their butts differently here. You got to learn how to do that because that's how they do it here. And I love that. I love the adventure of travel. I always loved when I was touring as a musician. Once I got about 30, 40 miles from home, if I had forgotten something, I just didn't have it. Whatever I needed was going to have to be out there somewhere, and I was going to have to figure it out. And that sense of adventure and learning and curiosity about the world is still very exciting to me. So I listen to podcasts, and I'm curious about science, I'm curious about medicine, I'm curious about other art forms, poetry and sculpture, painting. So now I'm painting a little bit because I'm curious about that. So when the pandemic happened, April 2020, it really changed the landscape of music in ways that I think most people don't know. I think at this point it's impossible for a certain kind of performer to do what they did. Like literally, financially, economically, it just doesn't work anymore.
Right. There is no more live performance.
There's no more of a certain kind of live performance. That's for sure. Like small rooms, there's still, people are still paying $20 a ticket. I would need to make $50 a ticket in order to make a comparable living to the way that I did before. And people aren't willing to pay that for small acoustic shows. The economics of scale are not there. Part of that difference I made up by selling records, and you just can't really sell records anymore. Not in the small time. I call it the small time. You can't really sell CDs off the CD table anymore.
What's that?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a coaster. It's like you set your drink on it. It's kind of like that, but there's digital information on it. Yeah, it's a relic. I just watched Batman Returns with my girlfriend a couple nights ago, and he put a CD in. We were just like, wow. This feels like this movie should be in black and white now, shouldn't it?
Well, it's actually interesting. There's a sculpture here right in the entrance to our recording studio, also known as my office. And because in my early days of doing sculpture, I had to give everything a function. So it's a CD cabinet. And I probably built this thing 25 years ago.
Right.
And it's, other than being a sculpture, its sole function is to hold CDs. And it's kind of like a reliquary now because it is stuffed full of CDs that I have not looked at in 25 years.
Absolutely. And I love Spotify too, or Tidal, or like Tidal has great sound quality. I like using Tidal, whatever. I like having access to the world's music. I like being in my truck and driving around town and not having to have the case logic on the passenger seat digging through for another CD. There are pros and cons to all that, but you can't argue with the consumer.
Yes.
You have to give them what they want. And so as makers, we might have to adapt in that way. I loved making records. I can't really afford to make records anymore because I can't make the money back. Like I would spend $20,000 making an album, and I would make that back at least in the first year, maybe the first 6 months of touring. I would make that money back, and then I would be making a profit. Now I would never. Like I'd be dead before that album made that money back. So I can't do that anymore. I can still make music, but making that thing is not lucrative enough for me to do it anymore.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point. Curiosity and openness are, I think, essential ingredients to a life as a maker. Mm. And the other thing that's really important is openness to change.
I think that for me, as a maker, I need to be trying new things all the time. So one of my favorite songwriting techniques is to try a new technique. That is the thing that gets me to create more than anything else. Can I make a song out of a sonnet in iambic pentameter? Can I make that poem make sense in a melody? Can I make a bridge out of a haiku? I think Ripple has a haiku.
Red Dead Song.
Bridge, right? And that was something that they thought about. Like, what if you can write a haiku and make it musical and put it in here? And that, to me, is motivating. And so for me, it's important to always be sort of outside of my comfort zone. That's where the good stuff really is. And there's something I call, just to harken back to, things that satisfy us that may not satisfy other people or may not satisfy the rules or the guidelines or whatever. There's a thing that I call trust your body. So if I'm creating something and suddenly I get a tear in the corner of my eye, or I'm playing something and I just start bobbing my head or tapping my foot, or I laugh out loud at something that I've written, I kind of put police tape around that thing, whatever that is. Like, be very careful about going in here and messing with this, because this touched something. And whether or not I understand it, there are parts of songs that people ask me, like, what does this mean? I still don't know. I have no idea what it means, but it makes me feel something. And the world is not made only of ideas.
The world is made of feelings, actually.
The world is also made of feelings.
And emotions.
Yeah.
And, God, there's so many things you just brought up there that I want to hit on all of them. I will feel something when I make something, and then I'll show it to other people and they don't see it. Mm-hmm. And my tendency is two extremes. One, fuck them, or two, edit it out.
Right.
And there's an intuitive feeling. I mean, I just, I'm working on a film with a good friend of mine, and I thought I had the perfect ending. And I said to my friend, well, what did you think of that last phrase? I thought it really just tied the whole thing together. And he said, yeah, it didn't work at all.
Right.
And it went, but when I put it in there, it gave me a feeling. Mm-hmm. It gave me that feeling that I trusted my body. And he said this, and it just wrapped it all. It put everything in a bundle. And I think it's because intuitively, I understand this differently than he understood it.
Right.
So
you know too much. Sometimes the maker knows too much. Right?
Yeah.
But that kind of feedback can be important. Like maybe there's nothing wrong with that ending, but maybe somewhere back in the film, there can be something else that helps you to get that ending. It helps somebody else to get that ending.
Right.
Maybe they don't know as much as you do about it, and you need to inform them a little bit along the way so that it lands. Right. So I think that kind of feedback is still important in finding that middle ground of like, not fuck you, not.
Yeah, exactly. Because the answer obviously usually is in the middle. It's not in the extremes.
Right. So maybe I can find a way, or maybe there's something in the way of it. Maybe there's something that happens right before that kind of is distracting to the meaning of this thing that I really want to put across.
Right.
So I just keep going back again to say, like, I've made this box around this thing that made me feel something. How can I make everybody else feel that? How can I get back to that? Like maybe I could just like get rid of everything else and just start with this. Maybe it's all about this, and I can expand this again and make everything lead back to here.
So, just to show you that I don't completely ignore all your social media, you have a great quote in one of your Instagram posting for one of your songwriting classes, and I love this quote: "I will make you write." And obviously a wonderful play on words, write, R-I-G-H-T versus R-I-T-E. Right. And you were alluding to that a little bit. So I am curious about what makes you write. You spoke a little bit about it, and it's interesting how universal all these processes are, whether we're talking about writing or sculpture, because I use a lot of different tools. Sometimes I create a problem set for myself. Mm-hmm. It's like, you want this element, and this element, how does it go together?
Right.
Or you have just this material, how are you going to do it? And so you alluded to some of that, but what makes Jonathan Byrd write? Both R-I-G-H-T and R-I-T-E.
Yeah, and I think what I was doing is I was talking about my workshops. So the thing about my writing workshops is you have to write if you're going to come to my writing workshops. That's just what it's about. We all meet each other, we get our names, and then boom, we start a writing exercise. And I ask you a question that has absolutely no context, usually. I'm like, where were you when you heard about the fire? I haven't told you anything about the fire. What fire? What are you talking about? I don't know. It's you. You write for the next 5 minutes, and then you're going to read it out loud to the class. So just getting started is the most important thing. Like if somebody tells me I'm a terrible writer, I'll say, good, write me a terrible thing. Write the worst thing, just the most cliche, on the nose, terrible trope of a thing. Write it for me.
But obviously because you're a terrible writer, you're very well at writing poorly.
Exactly.
Something you're really good at.
But it's liberating. Like when you do that, like I don't know if you've ever seen a movie that has just like a terrible song in it. It's obviously intentional. It actually takes a lot of intention and some skill to write something that's bad, so bad it makes you laugh, or it makes you cringe. It makes you feel embarrassed to be in the same room with it. That takes a little bit of skill to write something that bad. So just forcing people to write badly if they think they're going to write badly. If you think you're writing badly now, make it worse. And you will find things in that process. There's no way you won't find something by the second or third page. There's no way you will not uncover something that makes you feel something if you just get started. There's a fantastic book called The Artist's Way. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes.
If people haven't heard of it, The Artist's Way is essentially a workbook that does this. It just forces you to get started on something. And you have these things called morning pages. You have to write 3 pages every morning of whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. You can write, I hate writing my morning pages because they suck. Just have to keep moving. And without fail, in somewhere into the second page, somewhere in this process, something lands on the page that has this feeling that a lot of artists convey this feeling. I don't know exactly what the tie is here, but it feels like you didn't do it. It feels like it came from somewhere. You write something, or you make something, or you play something on your instrument that feels as if it was given to you. To me, that's the moment.
Given to you, or somebody else created it? Because you almost leave it open-ended in the sense that wasn't me, it was too good to be me.
Possibly, yeah. You could be quoting something and not be aware of it.
Right.
But I think what's happened is that you have hit the zone where your conscious and subconscious minds have started working together. And your subconscious mind is handing up memos. Here you go, take this to the boss. And your conscious mind goes, whoa, where did that come from? It came from your history and your experience and the trauma in your childhood or whatever. It came from somewhere. But you don't have to be aware of where it came from. You do have to dig for a little while to get to that moment. It takes 10, 15, 20 minutes of writing or playing or sculpting or whatever it is. It takes a little bit of time making yourself start, even though you hate it. But once you get into that zone, that's the sweet spot. You may only be there for a minute. You might be there for an hour. You don't know. But you have to work into that zone, and that only writing is writing. So this is in my workshop. That's another thing I say. Only writing is writing. Talking about stuff is just talking about stuff. Thinking about stuff is just thinking about stuff. Only if the pen is moving on the paper can you call it writing.
Yeah, we'll get into my biggest grievance on Instagram makers, which are talking about making. Well, talking about making is not making.
Right.
It is, well, in this case it is, but this is with intention. You have to do something with intention, and you got to make.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but in terms of, so here's another book, and it's the author is Austin Kleon, and he wrote a book I love called Steal Like an Artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's another thing in sort of the pantheon of our tools, because you're talking about your subconscious. Well, your subconscious is full of all these things you've seen, you've heard. And none of us are recreating the wheel. We're all using the legacy of people who came before us. But knowing how to use it appropriately is the key. Right. Knowing how to steal like an artist.
Okay, so here's an exercise I've done probably a dozen times. I actually have a playlist, a Spotify playlist. It's a public playlist, and it's called Mamas and Babies. So the mamas are where the song came from, and the baby is the song. And what I do is I put a song like, for instance, Pancho and Lefty by Townes Van Zandt, and I follow it up with my song Diana Jones. And you hear them back to back. That song in particular, you can hear the influence if you listen to those back to back. Because some of them, like Elvis Presley Blues by David Rawlings and Gillian Welch, followed by Coyote, which is another one of my songs, they feel like they have absolutely nothing in common. But the exercise that I did to write those songs was I wrote the lyrics to the existing song in a notebook, and I skipped a line between every line. And then I wrote lines that had different words but the same scansion as the line in the original song. So, for instance, if they were in an iambic pentameter, then my line is in iambic pentameter. It has 5 feet, 5 iambs, whatever. And And then I rewrite my lines on a fresh piece of paper without the original lines. And then I start creating a melody that's different from the original melody that these words still fit into. And again, at some point in the process, I hit the zone and it becomes mine. It stops feeling like it belongs to somebody else. And if you listen to this playlist on my public playlist on Spotify, Mamas and Babies, there's one or maybe two songs where you can hear the influence. And the rest of them I would say there's no way. You would never know that this song came from that song. But that exercise is a way to get me started. And it's also an honest admission that I am influenced by everything, by all these things. Just own your influences. Just learn a Tony Rice tune. If you want to flat pick guitar, learn how to play like Tony Rice. Learn how to play like Doc Watson. Imitate them as best you can.
And then forget them.
And at some point, you are going to play something and it's going to feel like yours.
That is the conclusion of part 1 of our discussion with Jonathan Byrd, an amazing thinker, and hopefully whets your appetite to listen to episode 2 and the completion of our discussion. As always, thank you so much for listening to Why Make. Why Make is a production of Rob Helmkamp and Erik Wolken, and you can support our current fundraising campaign for our trip to the Emma International Collaboration in Big River, Saskatchewan by going to why-make.com and clicking on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible through our fiscal sponsored Fractured Atlas.